Dear students, today our topic is relative clause. In order to understand the relative clause, we should know some basic, what we can say, some basic terms associated with it. First of all, we will define here what is a clause. Dear students, a clause is a group of words which forms a sentence or part of a sentence and has a subject and predicate of its own. It always has a verb. Now, here you got the definition of clause. So, what is basically a clause? Group of words which forms a sentence, or we can say it is a part of a sentence, and this clause has a subject as well as a predicate of its own. Moreover, we can say that it always has a verb. Dear students, you should know the difference between clause and a phrase. In phrase, we simply say group of words that represents a sense but not a complete sense. Okay? And we do not find their subject in the phrase. So clause is different from a phrase. Dear students, in order to understand this relative clause, we should also know what is a relative pronoun. You know what is a pronoun, but what is a relative pronoun? A relative pronoun is a pronoun. For example, who, that, which, where, etc. They are all relative pronouns. Joins, links the relative clause to another clause. So simply we can say that relative pronouns, they join or links the relative clause to another clause. You are aware about clauses, that clauses can be classified into different types. We have got the main clause, which is called independent clause, which does not depend on any other clause for its sense. Similarly, we have got dependent clause, which is also called which is also called subordinate clause, which depends upon the main clause. Okay. Now, what is a relative clause? When we define a relative clause, dear students, relative clause is a clause. Basically, it is from the dependent clause. So it is a dependent clause which gives us essential information about the subject in a sentence. So relative clause is a clause which gives us essential information about the subject in a sentence. Got it? It is always placed immediately after its antecedent. That means after its predecessor. जो इससे पहले आता है ना, which comes before it. तो and it is placed immediately after its antecedent, or we can say predecessor in the sentence. Dear students, this relative clause, it always starts with a relative pronoun. So whenever you find in a sentence that a clause which starts, so we can say that how can we identify a relative clause? Dear students, relative clause always starts with a relative pronoun. Here you know that relative pronouns are here who, that, which, why, which, whose, where, etc. Okay. So here we can add also, they are most often used. That means what? They are most often used to define or identify the noun that precedes them. So relative clause, or we can say the relative pronouns, they are most often used to define or identify the noun that precedes them. So they define or identify the noun that comes before them. In See, here we can say in the relative clause. Dear students, there are certain examples. The man who lives next door is an engineer. The bus which goes to the airport runs every hour. What was the name of the horse that won the race? I met a man whose sister knows you. All the all the relative pronouns like who, which, that, whose, they are in these sentences, so they represent a relative clause. So you here got the information what is a clause, what is a relative pronoun, and how can we define a relative clause. In order to got to know, or we can say in order to understand the whole relative clause, uh, here we should know the basics. So in this lecture I have tried my level best to give you the concept, to give you the basic concept before deliberating upon the relative clause in the further lectures. Thank you, dear students.